Welcome, everyone. I am so excited about my expert this month. You've hung in there with me. We've had some that were really big and some that were really famous. This one's really smart. I've read and I've watched videos as he chuckles in the background. And this is a pretty important fellow that's not from the U.S. This is my first out of the United States guest. I'd like for you to meet Paul Kelly. He is with the University of Guelph, and that is Ontario. Hi, Paul. Welcome.
Hi, Chari. Pleased to be here.
Wonderful. Well, I tell you, I don't want my guests to think that I've stalked them, but I do try to get my research done, and I find in my reading that you actually get to work where you graduated.
That's right. I got my first real taste of beekeeping right here at the University of Guelph, and got to hang out with the guy that had my job back in the day. And he was so free with his time and knowledge and expertise that, it just felt kind of homey coming out here for a visit. And I've been pretty well living here ever since.
Isn't that something? I think that's called that full circle is what we call that in the United States. We've come full circle. That's awesome. You manage the bee colonies there for the research group. Is that what I understand?
Yes, we run about 300 colonies of bees. I keep bees on the side myself, so I have about 120 of my own hives. But our hives that we have at the university, we keep for research and education purposes. We teach approximately 800 students a year some form of apiculture or beekeeping course. And our research is focused on hive health. We do collaborate with other people and even get into a bit of other animal health with their vet science group as well, but mostly it's bee health. And because we're managing these bees for the research and education, we have an economic opportunity, and we're kind of unique in the university in that we have a very entrepreneurial program here. We generate a significant amount of the funds that we use to hire students and so on through the sales of the products that we produce from our bees.
Well, that's wonderful. Huh, that's an interesting approach.
Yeah, it's we've had to, in the last couple of years, with it, along with everybody else, learn how to do things in a way that's COVID safe, and so we set up online sales, and curbside pickups, and we found that it's just vastly improved our the service that we're able to provide and the amount of time it takes us to provide that service. So we have educational materials and all sorts of products from beehives on our website, and we're caught up with the modern era in that we're able to handle all sorts of digital transactions. That too is kind of a unique situation in a university environment, being able to push the money through all the channels it needs to go through to get back to us so we can spend it on our research program. But it's been fun, and I've had a lot of help, particularly from my colleague Janet Tam, that does our administration and our honey packaging and our honey sales. And she's good with technology, which I'm not. And so we make a great team, but we've got a lot of student help too. And it's really fun working with all the students.
That's an incredible method of enhancing your funds. I feel the need to pass that along to some of our local universities that I'm very familiar with. There's no way we can ever afford what we really want to do in the university system. And for you to have figured it out and be able to channel that the correct way, somebody ought to be tapping y'all for that information. Well, let's start talking about bees, because I really, I'm completely intrigued with several aspects that you're involved in. And I'm going to start with one that saw where you're working with Barna Epson on what I called allogrooming, grooming and defensive behavior. Tell us a little bit about that study and what y'all are learning at this point, and tell our listeners what that really means.
Right. Yeah, it is quite an interesting study, and we got going at this at least 12 years ago. So what you're hearing about now is just like the latest of what we've been doing. We wanted to look at the different bee behaviors and compare those to the varroa mite level growth rate and also to the effects of mites on colonies. So we looked at hygienic behavior, defensive behavior, grooming behavior, which I'll get into in a bit. And we found that the grooming behavior was the most closely linked to improving the mite, or actually knocking back the varroa mite population growth. To do this, what we do is put one mite on a bee's back from the colony we're testing, and then we put them in a petri dish and then we score the battle. So we basically watch the bee's behavior. How many legs did they get going? How long do they try to groom the mite off? Are they successful in the grooming the mite off? So we basically have a counter in each hand and we're clicking away and coming up with a numerical score for this behavior. And some bees are much better at this allogrooming or self-grooming. And we found after studying that we had a very close relationship between that and good grooming behavior and low varroa population growth. Moving on, like we've done many other tests along there, but that's the most important one, the grooming test. It's not something that's simple for beekeepers to do because you need to do this many, many, many times for many, many, many colonies. We started off with 300 colonies. So what we're doing instead is recommending that beekeepers that are interested in doing this breeding method just count mites. That's something we can all do. And if we test our colonies for mites in the spring, test our colonies for mites late in the summer, the difference between those two is the varroa growth rate. And we can breed from colonies that have a low varroa growth rate. And we're capturing that grooming behavior and any other mechanism that could be in play for the low varroa mite growth.
That's that, and you're exactly right. That's what in our area and the demographic that I'm exposed to. It's just basically culling queens and breeding queens off of those low varroa thresholds, and because that's the ones you want. You know, that's the genetics that you want.
Absolutely. We don't want to lose other good characteristics along the way, so we have to, be monitoring for that too. But one point I'd like to make here: this is not a survival method of breeding bees. We are treating all our hives for mites, so we do our best to keep all our hives alive. Sure. But we don't breed from the colonies that have a high varroa growth rate, or that's the goal over time. To begin with, we did actually breed low varroa growth rate and high varroa growth rate just to see fairly quickly if what the mechanism and the plan that we had was going to be effective. As of this year, and I'm very thankful for this, we're no longer breeding colonies for high varroa growth rate. I'll be so happy to get rid of those bees, but we needed to do that for our research.
Yeah. Yeah, and I read about that. I read where that progress you made. You had to in order to make the study realistic and to get real answers, and that makes complete sense. So I'm happy to hear that you are doing what you need to do to keep the colonies alive, because survivor stock that's a tough way to go. It's there's a lot of loss doing survivor stock, and I won't bore you with what I know about that, but very, very interesting. And I'd like to follow that and maybe revisit with you next year and see where you are coming, how it's coming along. Such a wonderful part of our industry. We've got to get this, the bromide under control. I mean, when you and I were first starting, it wasn't even a thing. And
Oh,
now,
absolutely. And now it's your primary focus.
yeah,
The one point I'd like to make here now is that we're not trying to establish one kind of stock that has resistance. What we're doing is establishing a program that's simple to follow, where people anywhere can be doing this breeding work. And we feel that if enough people are doing it, the same kind of selection over a broad geographic base, internationally even, that we can all be kind of working together in solving this problem. Because we kind of mask the problem with miticides, we're really not allowing evolution to occur. So we're going to be stuck in the same spot 50 years from now unless we start doing something different. And I think this is one good way to make that change.
I agree. I agree completely. I'm gonna move on to my second bullet point I had here on my cheat sheet, I'll call it. Single brood chambers. So in watching you and your beekeeping, I noticed right off the bat that you're running single deeps. And I'm very familiar with that and what that means. Could you tell our listeners when and why you migrated to running just single deeps and kind of what that means in case they don't know?
Yeah, Sherry. It's a question I'm happy to answer because we went through a transition here that in the logic pro con that we went through, struggled with. I hear other people struggling with that now, and so I'd like to address this. But I was taught, as many were, that the only way to keep bees is 2 brood chambers, and that was that. You weren't going to have success if you tried to do it any other way. And that I was a firm believer in that, as were most of the beekeepers in the province here. But there's one little pocket, this one little area in Ontario where the beekeepers had always kept bees in singles. Their bees did fine. They were good honey producers. They great beekeepers too. And so I've got to know one fellow there, a guy named Barry Davies, Barryddavies. Really great beekeeper. And he basically, I just learned from watching him how to do this. He had kind of given up on trying to talk people into this. So I watched and learned. And the first year I got into it, I had split my own colonies. I had 12 hives and I split to 60. And they were only in singles by the time we got to the fall. So that was, I kind of had to learn how to manage these to get them through the winter. So had great success with that, found everything a whole lot easier and learned over time some of the different things you need to do differently with singles versus doubles. But the transition was actually quite easy to do and everything just got simpler. And so I do a lot of speaking at local beekeeping groups. And at that time, my main talk was how to manage single brood chamber hives, because it was new to everybody then. And there was a lot of debate at all those meetings, as you can imagine. We went from about 5% singles in Ontario to about 80% singles in Ontario now. And that transition happened 25 years ago. But we're now learning in, getting out and speaking to beekeepers in other areas that transition hasn't happened. So there's a lot of interest.
Well, and it is, because I mean, there's so many attributes that, first of all, it's less equipment. It's less moving that top box off to inspect that bottom box. That's one thing that we, our students over the years is, it's really tough to get a new beekeeper to pull that top 75-pound box off and set it on the ground to inspect that bottom deep. And this solves that issue.
That's one of the biggest hurdles in beekeeping, is taking that second heavy box off. First of all, prying it off without pulling up some frames from down below. and then picking it up, setting it down on the ground, and it's very heavy, awkward, low. And if people can't do that, they're not going to do a proper inspection of the brood chamber. And so they really can never become a good beekeeper because of the physical limitations there.
That's so true. I coined a phrase. I'm sure I didn't make it up, but I'm gonna pretend like I did years ago, of bottom box neglect. Suffering from bottom box neglect. And it's because they just simply, they're intimidated by it, and it's heavy, and there's lots of, it's like a brick wall that they cannot penetrate. And single deeps, for those that aren't aware, is really, it's, you can manage you can really fill it to probably close to 40,000. I mean, I may be off on my numbers. I've never counted them, but it's a full box. And then you add the queen excluder and a medium, for all intents and purposes, a medium super in our world. And that gives them the space. It gives the bee bodies a space, yet they're still able to produce. The queen, they're storing more upstairs than they do down, so therefore more room for the queen to lay. That's
perfect. Perfect explanation.
Well, I'm thrilled to see you doing that. And I think that I need to do a better job of pushing that here in the United States as well. It could probably open up a whole new window for people who have stopped or are holding back because of the limitations of weight and inspections and so forth. So I commend you for that. And 80% of the hives being single deeps, that's amazing. I'll tell on myself briefly and say that we were those beekeepers that thought that the double deep was the way to go. We many years ago, probably 2017, if I'm not mistaken, we spoke at ABF, American Beekeeping Federation Conference, and spoke on maximizing honey production. And we were kind of tailing on Morris Ostrowski's getting more bees, more honey, more bees, more honey. And this absolutely thwarts that. You can get just as much honey from a single deep as you can a double deep. I enjoyed that talk. All right, so let me bump down to swarm prevention, because I saw you do something that my mentor said don't do. I can't wait to hear you tell me about this, because we all have our mentors, right? And we tend to kind of favor their methodology, and mine said don't do what I'm about to read, and you did this, and I can't wait to hear what I'm sure you do well, or you wouldn't be doing it. It said that you can find swarm cells and remove those swarm cells, just reintroduce a queen without doing a split, and you're successful at that. They don't swarm on you anyway.
Yeah. Well, we have to put a bit of context around that.
Please do.
What we do in the spring is evaluate, every hive gets a number, how many frames of bees covered that are covered. So then as the spring progresses, we can watch where that number goes. Is it going up or is it going down? And anything that's rated at a high strength first thing in the spring, we're really watching down the road for swarming behavior. We make up splits when we have queens available. Sometimes we're needing to deal with a swarm prevention and swarm control prior to making up those splits. So that was the situation in the video that we've done on swarm control. We've done one video also on swarm prevention. So that's all the things like giving the bees enough space, having genetics there that are not predisposed to swarming, young queens in colonies, and just timeliness in supering and providing space for the bees. So that's swarm prevention. Swarm control is when we have to step in because the bees are starting to prepare to swarm. So what we do is we'll go through those colonies that are high strength at the time of year where swarming behavior can occur. And then we just inspect those for swarm cells. If I go through 2 or 3 frames of brood and I don't see any swarm cells, I just close the hive up and move on to the next hive. So it doesn't take that long in that situation. When you do start seeing swarm cells, the first thing I look for is eggs. If there are eggs still present, the queen is very likely still there. If there are no eggs present, I do not remove swarm cells. It could be the queen's already gone, or maybe they tried to swarm and it didn't work out. She's off in the grass somewhere and they don't have a queen. So if you remove all the cells, then the colony can become hopelessly queenless. But so we look for eggs. Then I look for the queen. And that's my preference. Not everybody's going to do that. And set her aside. But by doing that, I know the colony has a queen for sure, and removing the cells won't do the colony any harm. And then we shake every frame off, every bee off every frame, or that's our goal, so that we can very clearly see where there are swarm cells and remove anything that even looks close to a swarm cell. Cups, odd drone pupa, or things that even look kind of close to a cell, everything goes. If we miss one cell, there was no point in doing any of this, because the colony would still swarm. But if we do this and then pop the queen back in, things change. She continues to lay eggs. The bees may or may not start to build more swarm cells. But once the swarm season comes near to an end, they get more into honey production and packing away honey and forget all about swarming. So most times, one of these interventions is enough to prevent the problem. And we can save the colony from swarming, produce honey, maybe take a split later on. Lots of things we can do if we've kept our bees in the boxes.
That is so interesting to me, because of course what we were told is if you remove the swarm cells, we weren't told look for the eggs. And that is where, I hear the choir sing with what you're talking about, what I saw in your video. Truly, and I just wanted to hear you say it. It's truly the answer. If you see eggs, then there's obviously still a queen in there.
Yeah, I think the queen stops laying eggs for about 3 days.
That's prior to taking off.
Yeah, so she can shrink her abdomen up enough to be able to fly. So if there's no eggs, it's either very close to swarming or they've already swarmed.
That's so true. It's just nerve-wracking for some. I can absolutely see us trying to do this if we were a little late catching one that was just bursting at the seams. But for everyone listening, this is a great way to approach swarm season and a colony that you weren't quite sure about where it stood, but grading those frames, counting where am I in the number of bees that are in there. That's a big deal in itself. Just knowing where you are in the amount of bees and that population growth and coming in spring. When is spring for you, by the way?
I find it very useful, Chari. But what I used to do is grade them weak or very weak, or medium plus, or strong plus, and that the next person working with me, that doesn't mean anything to them. It's just far easier to estimate the number of frames covered in bees. You're not actually measuring anything. You're getting an estimate, but if you do it enough, you get accurate enough for making management decisions.
And we've done, and I agree with you completely. Counting the frames is what I refer to it, or we refer to it as. It's just looking down in the seams, really, because you're looking at two sides of a frame. Really, in essence, you're seeing both sides from the top, of course. When does your spring start, Paul?
We get pollen. The first pollen coming in the year is probably the best indicator when spring starts. But that's usually late March or early April. We'll start getting some pollen in from silver and red maple. Those are the first two pollen sources that we get. And so that's the start. But our active beekeeping season really starts the beginning of May. there's some things we can do beforehand, but we try not to do too much because we're opening it and closing hives when the weather may be cooler. There's not, we basically are just trying to make sure they have enough food at that point and leaving them alone, but we might be doing some mite treatments earlier too. But as far as getting in and being very active in the brood chambers, the beginning of May is when that starts.
Interesting, because I've talked to a lot of expert beekeepers across, I'm gonna say half the nation, my nation. And maple is always the first. Isn't that interesting? Even though you're 2 months behind me, we see ash and elm and maple all kind of almost start at the same time, but we're seeing that end of January, 1st of February. I know. You
That's
ever
a
want to
contrast.
visit, let me know. But we also, I think we catch up because in hearing what you're saying, you know, you're ramping up early April. I assume your drones and everything kind of come into play about that time. So you're able to start making your splits and so forth for that 1st of May.
Yeah, we have, it's usually mid-May before we have cells, queen cells that we can
Oh, really?
start introducing to colonies. We really can't start raising queens until we get into May.
Okay.
As far as mated queens for sale, it's pretty late here. We can't have those until at least the 1st week of June. So that in a way does limit things. And so we try and encourage our beekeepers here to manage their hives in the spring to prevent swarming, to make sure they get supered. We can get some early nectar flows there. And then when we have queens available locally, make up splits, re-queen colonies, and so on.
When is and how long is your honey production?
The main nectar flow starts approximately mid-June and ends in mid-September. And
Wow.
we have flows that come and go throughout that time frame. Sometimes August is a little bit slower, but we typically do have a good fall flow.
So you really don't experience a dearth as such. You know, we go through dearth where there's, I mean, July and August for most of the U.S. is just nothing. You know, we're probably supplemental feeding for our bees, and then we have a second flow that we hope to gain for packing away for winter. So it does fluctuate, but you're not seeing a dearth in your area?
No, but when I first got into beekeeping, I was told there's typically a dearth right after dandelions here. I don't see that to be true anymore, at least in our area. There's hawthorn, there's raspberry, there's a number of berries blooming at that point. So we don't really see a dearth there. If there's any dearth, it would be in August if it gets very dry. And then it's kind of, if your bees are in an area that aren't near alfalfa or aren't near a river valley, then you're not doing too well. So we try to look for yards that are near dairy, have a variety of land use around, some wild spaces, some agricultural spaces, and those are our best yards, and they are less likely to have a dearth.
Well, supplemental feeding, I mean, knowing that, and I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, you have to supplement at that time that you.
No, we don't. It's not significant enough that we need to do any feeding in those periods, but we do need to leave some honey on the colonies throughout the summer. So I'll give you an example. If we're harvesting honey early August, which is typical for the summer honey, we'll harvest it at that point. We make sure we leave at least half a medium depth super of honey on the colony in case they're running low on feed with the potential dearth in August. So we just leave them with a bit of honey. That's not in the brood chamber. That's in a honey super, and it's above a queen excluder. But the bees can help themselves to that, and they can ride through potential periods of low nectar.
Well, and that's great. If there's a deficit, it's right there. It's right upstairs. I think that we can learn something from that. I mean, I feel like I should. That I've said for many years that it's perfectly fine to leave a honey super on. If you've got 2 or 3 that you're, supers that you yielded, leave them one, leave them one. And that we know that their honey is better nutrition for them than, our own version of a nectar, sugar syrup or purchased syrup. I think that we all should take your lead and try to leave enough to get them through that. Ours is elongated, or at least the southern states. I'm in grow zone 8, 9 or so, and that's warm, and we have dearth, and it's elongated. So even if we were to leave maybe a super, we would still have to. But it's very good, very good. I could talk to you all day. Now I'm just getting selfish in my questions, right? It's not for the listeners, it's for me. On hive inspections. No, wait a minute, I'm gonna back up. Genetics. Something that is very obvious by your videos is that y'all must have awfully good genetics, because you're able to beekeep with very little protective gear, if any. And that is not the case in my world. We have what we call sweet bees, but there's so many out here that are not, that in working this hive, we may, invite others that aren't. So therefore we do wear quite a bit of protective gear. What are your genetics just sweet? I mean, they're just good because you don't have our,
we had pretty bad bees here. When I first started work here, our bees were terrible. And that was true generally across Ontario, but we basically didn't know better. We didn't know the bees could be that much better. We brought stock in from Buckfast Abbey in England when we were doing work with tracheal mite resistance. We were working to breed bees to have resistance to tracheal mite. And we're fortunate with that one that, evolution kind of took care of that as well as the work that we're doing, but we sped it up a little bit by doing breeding work. And we brought Buckfast bees in from England. First time bees had been brought into North America since 1927. We brought them in 1990. And so there's some significant hurdles to get quarantine procedures and so on set up. But a side benefit of bringing these mite resistant bees in from England was that we gained very good bees to work with, and we learned how to breed for Buckfast criteria. And so one of the main things you're breeding for when you breed Buckfast bees is low defensive behavior. Bees that are calm in the comb, that don't fly up into the air, respond well to smoke, and are much less likely to sting. And we continue with this testing, and it's kind of a big process to get into now. I won't describe that, but we do make that an important part of what we're breeding for. And you can see the results in our videos. What you showed there is that's exactly how we manage bees here. Every new employee gets a pair of coveralls. Most of them don't put them on the whole summer they're working, and that's people new to bees. So
yeah, that's awesome. We run Italian Carniolan, which is obviously a mixed genetic, but trying to get the best of both worlds. And they're very sweet bees, and probably for the most part, I could definitely work them without suits. It's just that we've got still so many that are not nice, that we're in the Africanized zone. Obviously I'm in Southeast Texas, and very, very strong genetics here. So when a queen does get self-generated, like we were talking about swarms a minute ago and swarm cells, So when you do have that happen and they do go out in there and mate in the population, do you come back and requeen that, or do you wait and see what the temperament of the hive is, or are your drone populations so good now because of your good management?
Well, your last point is really where we're at, or what we tried to be doing anyway. We try and control the drone population in our environment, and that sounds difficult to do. It's, in our case, not so hard, actually. We do all our mating in the areas that we have the most control over. We don't do any mating in out yards where we don't have control over the drone population. So any mating nukes or any splits that have queen cells in them all get mated in our home yard or on an island where we have complete control over the drone source. Within those areas, we eliminate as quickly as possible any hive that has any defensive behavior. So we're eliminating those potential drones from contributing to our mating. And over time, this has obviously got easier as we have more and more control over our area. And we encourage beekeepers that if they don't have complete control over the area, to supply queens to the neighbor beekeepers that are in the same area. And our research at the University of Guelph here with Dr. Guzman has shown that gentle behavior, or the lack thereof, is inherited from the drones. So if you keep that in mind, that gives you a way to breed for gentle behavior. You just need to control the mating. Now, I can't comment on your situation with Africanized bees. You know, that's a tougher place to be. We're fortunate to not have that to deal with.
Well, and I think most of the managed hives, especially on larger scale commercial, we do very well at keeping nicer, better genetics. I love your suggestion of just basically providing your neighbor beekeeper with the proper genetic queen. I mean, that's worth an investment right there, because some people don't, or even offer to requeen them, and doing away with the bad genetics. I think that's key. That's key. Well, before I run out of time, and I'm getting so close, in hive inspections, you're very detailed. I loved watching you. You're very methodical, very much like myself. You pull a frame, you look at it, and then return it, and so forth. Is there some kind of maybe a tidbit, we'll say, that you could offer maybe a 1 to 3 year beekeeper of something you learned years ago, or just recently even, that's just, you really think that this is the answer to a good hive inspection as we get off into spring or even summer? Is there anything that makes your hive inspections work smoothly and get it taken care of quickly?
Hard to pick one point, but one thing that I make sure of is that I have access to the side of the hive. I see a lot of people put hives tight together in rows, and then the only place you can stand is at the back of the hive or in front of the hive. It makes visibility and handling far more cumbersome. So you're killing more bees, you don't see things well, and you're taking away an advantage. When you stand at the side of the hive, the frames come up, you hold them in a natural position, and we always remove a frame where it's less risky. We take the second frame in the hive out, and then we make sure we give it some space before we take it out, and then we lean that in front of the hive on the far corner where it's not in the way, and then we can proceed to take frames out and put them back in after we've done the inspection. I think we show that well in our video on Colleen's inspection. I really like to focus on that with new beekeepers, because if they are comfortable with doing that, they're going to do it, and then they can really manage their bees.
That's very That is a very good tip. And I've not thought about that. You know, we teach them back, you need to just not be in the front, either side or back, either one. But you're right, you're not able to work it. You've got to pull it up this way if you're at the back and then rotate it. It's so much better. Plus trying to find queens, looking down inside between the frames.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's if you're going to find queens, you can't just be looking at the one in your hand. You kind of look down in between, and there's a lot of things you can see better in that orientation.
Very good, very good. I'm gonna call it parting advice from you, Paul. Very, very good. I truly enjoyed our conversation. I'd love to revisit with you again next year, and we'll see where you're going. We'll look at different videos, and I hope to see you again at a show coming up soon.
Yeah, I've got a few trips to the States planned. I'm going to West Virginia later this month, and in August to EAS in Massachusetts, and then in the fall to Maine. Who knows where else, but in the U.S. those are some of the trips coming up.
Fantastic. And for sure, Hive Life next year, first of the year. We'll see you there.
Oh, I hope to go back there. That was a lot of fun. This year, we just had a great time down there, meeting so many great people. It was a lot of fun.
It was, and that's, you know, I was just thankful to get to meet you with all the crowds that were gathered around you there. So we'll plan to do that again. Well, Paul, thanks so much, and we'll talk soon. You have a great day.
Thank you, Chari. Appreciate your interest.